At dawn on January 12, 1945, on the outskirts of Luzon, the humid air clung to the earth like a suffocating blanket as American infantry advanced through ruined sugarcane fields still smoldering from the previous night's shelling. The distant rumble of artillery trembled through the soil, and a thin white fog drifted across shattered huts where fragments of bamboo clattered in the wind. Inside one half-collapsed shelter, a group of Japanese women prisoners, nurses, clerks, and auxiliaries captured during the sudden American breakthrough, huddled together with trembling hands. Every sound outside, from boots crunching gravel to the static burst of radio chatter, made them flinch. Many had grown up hearing stories circulated through Imperial homefront broadcasts warning that capture by Americans meant unthinkable humiliation. A few whispered silent prayers while others stared at the floor, bracing themselves for the brutality they believed was moments away. The fear in that room had a physical weight, pressing against their ribs like tightening bandages. Yet the U.S. platoon approaching them moved with a different intention. Sergeant Louis Hartman, whose unit had fought across Leyte before pushing into Luzon, recalled in a field interview preserved in a February 1945 Divisional Intelligence Summary how his men carried explicit instructions from their commanders: treat all prisoners, male or female, with strict discipline, but also with dignity. That order echoed the wider guidance issued by General Walter Kruger's Sixth Army, which had emphasized clear separation between propaganda myths and operational reality. Still, the women inside had no way to know this. Through cracks in the hut's walls, they saw silhouettes of helmets advancing and assumed the final act of their lives had begun. Their breathing grew faster. Someone stifled a sob. The suspense felt as sharp as shrapnel. Beyond the hut, the broader war was reaching its most violent crescendo. By early 1945, the Pacific had become a battleground of exhausted armies and collapsing fortresses. Japan, still controlling pockets of the Philippines, directed its remaining regiments to fight to the last man rather than surrender. American planners estimated that more than 250,000 Japanese troops were still scattered across the archipelago, entrenched in ravines, jungle ridges, and coastal fortifications. The doctrine of no surrender, reinforced by the Imperial Army's military code, had already produced staggering losses. U.S. divisions advancing under General Douglas MacArthur saw entire battalions wiped out before ever considering laying down arms. These realities made the capture of any prisoners, especially women, extraordinarily rare. The women auxiliaries captured near Luzon were part of support units attached to hospital detachments and communication centers. Most had been moved repeatedly as American forces advanced, their final retreat ending in chaos when U.S. mechanized columns, backed by M4 Shermans and reconnaissance jeeps, smashed through the defensive lines south of the city. Some had not eaten properly in days. Others wore uniforms stained with soot and ash from burned supply dumps. Fear turned every heartbeat into a countdown. Such dread was not imagined. It was the product of years of wartime indoctrination. Japanese broadcasts, like one circulated in mid-1944 by the Tokyo Central Information Bureau, insisted that American soldiers were wolves who knew no mercy. For the women inside the hut, capture meant expected torment. When the American platoon finally entered, rifles raised and boots thudding against the earth, the women froze. Several bowed their heads in resignation. One of the medics accompanying the U.S. group stepped forward, scanning the room. According to an enlisted man's account later included in a stateside training memo, the medic immediately noticed signs of dehydration, infection, and malnutrition. Instead of violence, he called for canteens and first aid supplies. The women did not react at first. Many believed the kindness was a ruse meant to confuse them before the real cruelty began. It was only when one soldier gently lifted a wounded nurse onto a stretcher, careful not to aggravate her injuries, that confusion flickered across her face. This moment, though small, marked the beginning of a dramatic psychological reversal. Outside, the larger operational picture continued to shape every decision. The U.S. Army sought valuable intelligence, radio codes, evacuation routes, supply depot locations, and prisoners were an essential source. Field commanders knew that humane treatment aligned not only with American military law but also with strategic necessity. A March 1945 logistics bulletin emphasized that information extracted from cooperative detainees often saved lives, reduced ambushes, and helped map hidden tunnels. Meanwhile, Japanese High Command, expecting their troops to die rather than surrender, never accounted for the morale shock that would follow when word spread that captured women were being treated humanely. For American forces, this was both a moral stance and a battlefield advantage. Still, back inside the hut, the emotional gulf between expectation and reality created a strange silence. The women, now receiving water and bandages, stared in bewilderment at their captors. A few tried to speak but struggled to form words. One auxiliary later admitted during a post-war Tokyo hearing, preserved in translated transcripts, that the gentleness felt unreal, like the world had inverted. The Americans, expecting defiance or hostility, instead saw faces hollowed by fear and disbelief. The scene was far from peaceful. The crack of distant gunfire still echoed across fields. But within this small pocket of the battlefield, something profoundly unexpected unfolded. The sensory atmosphere heightened the surreal contrast. Smoke drifted upward from burned ammunition crates. The metallic clink of gear echoed as U.S. soldiers adjusted their packs. Wind rustled the scorched sugarcane. And in the middle of this war-torn landscape, medical gauze was wrapped around bruised wrists, and canteens were pressed into trembling hands. An infantryman later noted in a regimental journal that the women looked as though they were waiting for punishment with every breath. His words illustrated the magnitude of the psychological barrier that wartime propaganda had built. As the platoon escorted the group toward a temporary processing point, the women walked slowly, many glancing at the Americans as if expecting the sudden betrayal of everything they were witnessing. But step by step, the predicted cruelty never came. Their fear clashed with visible reality, and the contradiction only deepened their confusion. The Americans maintained their distance, discipline, and composure, adhering to the rules set months earlier by leadership determined to uphold standards even in the most brutal theaters of war. Yet this moment on Luzon was only the beginning. Across the Pacific, similar encounters were emerging, rare but powerful, where the stark contrast between propaganda and practice reshaped the experiences of Japanese women prisoners. And what happened next, when these early encounters spread into larger operations and intelligence networks, would reveal the deeper reason behind America's unexpected approach. That revelation, rooted in hidden directives, psychological warfare strategies, and logistical necessity, would unfold with even greater force in the battles that followed. The deeper truth behind America's unexpected treatment of Japanese women prisoners took shape months before that morning on Luzon, inside quiet planning rooms far from the front. In late 1944, as U.S. forces prepared for the liberation of the Philippines, military intelligence officers refined a strategy built on a simple but powerful principle: information could win battles just as decisively as artillery. A senior intelligence officer noted in an October briefing that humane handling of prisoners consistently yielded better cooperation, especially from non-combat personnel like auxiliaries and nurses. These ideas were reinforced by analysts who had examined captured diaries and letters showing how deeply Japanese civilians and support staff feared American troops. The analysts understood that overturning those expectations could create a psychological opening, one that might loosen tongues and dissolve resistance. The hidden advantage behind this approach wasn't just moral code or policy, it was organization. The U.S. Army of 1944-45 operated through a vast network of intelligence groups, interrogation teams, linguist battalions, and psychological warfare units. Many of these owed their efficiency to engineers and planners who had standardized field documents, portable recording equipment, and transport logistics. Technicians from the Signal Corps designed compact wire recorders that could be carried into forward operating areas to capture statements, while designers at the Hollywood Signal Depot refined translation kits and reference books so interrogators could work quickly. All of this mattered because every surrendered nurse or clerk might hold knowledge about supply chains, radio frequencies, or base layouts that could save American lives. For the Japanese side, the shock stemmed from their own assumptions. Imperial doctrine viewed surrender as a dishonor worse than death. This rigid belief was deeply ingrained through training manuals distributed since the late 1930s, which warned soldiers and auxiliaries that capture meant inevitable abuse. A composite account drawn from multiple Japanese survivors later described the American approach in the Philippines as contradicting everything we were taught. Officers had told them that women prisoners would be punished to break morale, and so their fear was not a misunderstanding, it was a deliberate expectation built into wartime culture. When the reality proved different, the psychological disruption was profound. The real test of this strategic approach unfolded in one major battle, the struggle for Manila, beginning in early February 1945. As American units pushed toward the city's shattered outskirts, they encountered a chaotic landscape of trapped civilians, desperate Japanese defenders, and fractured command structures. Among the civilians were small groups of Japanese nurses and clerical auxiliaries who had fled collapsing hospitals and communication posts. When elements of the U.S. 37th Infantry Division reached a ruined schoolhouse on February 10, they discovered more than 30 women sheltering inside. The encounter would become a defining moment that blended chaos, fear, and technical precision. The schoolhouse was a wreck. Bullet holes pocked the walls, and the floors were littered with broken desks. Smoke drifted through craters in the ceiling. As American scouts entered, they found the women crouched behind stacked furniture, their faces pale with dread. From the outside, the battle raged, the deep thump of naval guns along the coast, the whistle of shells passing overhead, and the sharp chatter of automatic fire. Inside, time seemed suspended. A lieutenant from the 37th Division remembered in an after-action narrative that the women braced for violence, expecting the brutality their officers had warned them about. Instead, the Americans lowered their weapons, called in medics, and began stabilizing the wounded. Confusion rippled through the room. This encounter produced valuable intelligence, and the technical apparatus behind its success was intricate. Portable field radios, some built using components designed months earlier by Western electric engineers, relayed messages to nearby intelligence teams. Within an hour, 2 linguists from the Military Intelligence Service arrived. Their presence was crucial. Many of the women spoke little English. These translators, many of whom had trained at the MIS language school in Minnesota, brought not only language ability but also an understanding of cultural nuances that helped build trust. One nurse, trembling but willing to talk after receiving medical care, provided details about Japanese ammunition depots hidden along the Pasig River. An auxiliary described evacuation routes used by retreating troops. These accounts aligned with earlier information documented in field notebooks by intelligence officers who had interviewed captured engineers and logistics staff. The U.S. Army acted quickly. That same night, artillery units targeted the supply dumps using coordinates derived from the women's statements, causing massive explosions that illuminated the riverbanks. Infantry commanders later acknowledged that this strike significantly reduced Japanese resistance in that sector. Enemy disbelief during this period played a major role in American success. Composite notes from interrogations recorded how Japanese defenders could not understand why their women auxiliaries were not being mistreated. Some speculated that the Americans were staging deceptive scenes to confuse captives. Others insisted the prisoners must have been coerced into lying. The psychological gap widened when rumors circulated among defenders that their captured nurses were being treated with unexpected care. A post-war psychological analysis compiled by Allied researchers observed that this contradiction undermined the certainty of Japan's "no surrender" doctrine during the Manila campaign. Technical factors continued shaping the story. Engineers at quartermaster depots had ensured that field rations and medical supplies reached frontline processing points, allowing American units to provide immediate care to prisoners. Signal Corps technicians maintained radio networks that allowed intelligence officers to share captured information faster than in any previous Pacific campaign. These behind-the-scenes contributions, often ignored in dramatic retellings, were essential. Without the engineers designing communication equipment, or the supply staff ensuring medical kits reached company aid stations, humane treatment and rapid intelligence gathering would have been far harder to achieve. By February's end, as Manila's destruction reached its peak, more groups of Japanese women emerged from hiding. Some were too weak to walk. Others carried wounded comrades. Each group braced for the cruelty they had been conditioned to expect, and each encountered something different. American soldiers, hardened by months of combat yet guided by discipline and doctrine, offered water, bandages, and carefully organized evacuation to safe zones. Reports from military police units described women pleading to know why they were being shown mercy. Their disbelief became a recurring theme in intelligence summaries. These encounters revealed the hidden advantage. Humane treatment was not merely compassion, it was a battlefield multiplier. It opened doors to cooperation, intelligence, and psychological leverage across the front. The Japanese command structure had no defense against this unexpected tactic, because it attacked the very foundation of their indoctrination. Yet the full impact of this approach stretched far beyond Manila. It influenced entire campaigns, morale on both sides, and post-war interpretations of conduct and honor. And the consequences, strategic, emotional, and historical, would continue to echo long after the guns fell silent. Those consequences form the heart of what comes next, where battlefield psychology, strategic shifts, and the human legacy of this unexpected mercy converge into a final revelation. In the months that followed Manila's liberation, the shockwave of America's treatment of Japanese women prisoners rippled far beyond the ruined city. What began as isolated encounters inside collapsing buildings and makeshift shelters soon evolved into a broader psychological pattern observed across the Pacific theater. Intelligence summaries written during the final push toward Okinawa noted how each newly surrendered group reacted the same way, stiff with terror, convinced that capture meant mutilation or humiliation. Yet when faced with the steady, disciplined conduct of American soldiers, the fear cracked, and beneath it emerged confusion and then something far more valuable: cooperation. Prisoner processing teams noticed that women auxiliaries frequently volunteered information about medical shortages, communication difficulties, and troop movements after realizing they would not be harmed. This growing willingness to speak altered not only tactical decisions but also the emotional landscape of the war. The strategic impact became visible during late-stage campaigns, particularly as U.S. forces tightened their grip on Japan's defensive ring. Reports from the 10th Army on Okinawa in mid-1945 describe how captured civilian nurses shared details about underground clinics, ventilation systems, and medical evacuation routes carved into the limestone ridges. These revelations helped American engineers and demolition teams understand the complexity of the cave networks, allowing them to neutralize positions with fewer frontal assaults. Military analysts later concluded that this intelligence prevented hundreds of unnecessary casualties. Their assessment emphasized that such cooperation was not coerced but born from relief that the fate they had feared was an illusion created by their own propaganda. This shift in morale had equally powerful effects on the Japanese side. As more women auxiliaries were captured when American troops advanced, word of their unexpected treatment began filtering back to isolated Japanese units. Interrogation notes compiled after the war showed that defenders often dismissed these accounts as manipulation, but doubt lingered. One composite account from a surviving infantryman described the atmosphere during the final days on Okinawa, rumors spreading through the caves that captured nurses were being tended to, not tortured. Even when soldiers rejected the idea, the presence of doubt weakened their resolve. Psychological warfare specialists noted that when absolute certainty breaks, discipline often follows. The Americans had struck at something deeper than supply lines. They had fractured a belief system that had been weaponized for years. On the American side, maintaining this standard demanded immense logistical and human effort. Field hospitals operating near contested areas depended on supply chains built by thousands of unseen workers across the Pacific. Engineers at CB construction battalions carved roads through jungles, leveled airstrips, and built medical stations capable of treating both wounded soldiers and prisoners. Technicians kept refrigeration units running to preserve plasma and penicillin supplies, innovations credited to U.S. medical engineers who had refined these systems earlier in the war. Without such infrastructure, the humane treatment that shaped the Pacific campaigns would not have been possible. The narrative of mercy was supported by the machinery of war, machines built not only to destroy but also to preserve life when needed. This dual purpose echoed through the decisions of field commanders. Many officers had fought through the harshest conditions in the Solomons, New Guinea, and the Philippines, witnessing brutality on every side. Yet operational doctrine emphasized that consistent, disciplined conduct among troops was not only moral but also strategic. Commanders noted that clear, humane policies made units more predictable and stable under pressure, reducing incidents of rash revenge during chaotic battles. This discipline elevated morale among American forces. Soldiers wrote in letters that treating prisoners decently reminded them of what they were fighting to protect, a standard of conduct that distinguished them from the enemy they had been battling for years. Meanwhile, Japanese prisoners, especially women in support roles, faced a profound internal transformation. Raised in a society that instilled unwavering obedience, and the belief that surrender was a fate worse than death, they found themselves confronting a new reality. Some recorded after the war that the first moments of capture were the most disorienting of their lives. Instead of the degradation they had feared, they received bandages, water, and calm instructions. This unexpected mercy forced them to reassess not only the enemy, but also the ideology they had been taught. It sparked a psychological reckoning that later informed Japan's post-war understanding of honor, duty, and humanity. The consequences continued into the post-war years as the world attempted to make sense of the Pacific conflict. In early occupation reports, American officers documented how Japanese civilians, particularly women, approached them with a mixture of fear and cautious hope. The stories told by former captives influenced this shift. Their recollections spread quietly through towns and villages, softening resistance and lowering tensions that could have erupted into deadly clashes. Allied administrators noted that this easing of fear made rebuilding efforts faster. Schools reopened sooner, hospitals stabilized, and local officials cooperated more readily when they learned of the treatment their compatriots had received months earlier. Historians examining this period later emphasized the role of human behavior as a strategic force. They argued that the unexpected treatment of women prisoners created a moral contrast that shaped Japan's transition from wartime rigidity to post-war reconstruction. And central to this shift were the engineers, medics, translators, and logisticians whose work made humane conduct possible even amid destruction. Their contributions rarely appeared in headlines, yet they facilitated the supplies, communication links, and medical capabilities that turned policy into reality. Without the refrigerated plasma developed by American medical innovators or the portable radios refined by Signal Corps technicians that allowed aid stations to coordinate safely, compassion could not have moved as efficiently across the battlefield. As decades passed, testimonies from both sides revealed a shared truth: mercy leaves a longer imprint than violence. Veterans spoke of the relief they felt knowing they had upheld their discipline even when rage and exhaustion tested their limits. Former prisoners described how the moment an American medic knelt beside them and offered water shattered the lies they had believed since childhood. These memories survived long after the war's ruins had been rebuilt. By the late 20th century, military scholars drew lines between these wartime experiences and modern doctrine. They argued that the ethical treatment of prisoners, backed by efficient logistics and technology, formed the foundation for contemporary rules of engagement and humanitarian operations. The principle that discipline strengthens strategy echoed into conflicts in Korea, Vietnam, the Gulf, and beyond. Today's network-centric warfare, with its emphasis on intelligence sharing, civilian protection, and rapid medical care, traces part of its lineage to lessons learned in the Pacific. In the end, the story of Japanese women prisoners in 1945 is not merely a wartime anomaly. It is a reminder that even amid fire and ruin, choices create ripples that outlast empires. One memory captures the truth carried by many who lived through those days: a nurse whispering that she had expected agony but found humanity instead. That single shift, fear turned to astonishment, became a quiet turning point in the final year of the Pacific War, and its echo still lingers in the world shaped by what happened next.